I want to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land we are meeting. How will history remember Ben Roberts-Smith? What does this mean for the reputations of our elite soldiers? And who is winning the rate rise blame game between the RBA and the government? Joining our panel, human rights advocate Thenu Herath, who is the Director of the Australian Council for International Development. Liberal member for Menzies, Keith Wolahan, a lawyer and a former captain in the Australian Army who served 3 combat tours of Afghanistan. Secretary of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Sally McManus, the first woman to hold the job in the organisation's 90-year history. Sky News' US contributor Michael Ware, who is in Australia for the world premiere of his new documentary The Cape at the Sydney Film Festival, and Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, Stephen Jones, who represents the Illawarra seat of Whitlam for Labor. Also tonight, is the chequebook dead? I'm Patricia Cardellis. Coming up later in the program, remember you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quanda is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Raymond Stambra.
Yep. Age and memory and the eyes don't go well. Okay.
Nail it.
Yes. War is war. I do not know about the issue with Ben Roberts-Smith, but my understanding is that things have happened in all wars. The Americans and the Russians are renowned for, sorry about that, indiscriminate shootings. I feel this is a witch hunt, and we do not know the real reason why this witch hunt has started. He could not be the only one who may have skated on the edge. No.
Michael Ware, let's begin with you on that. Could he not have been the only one that skated on the edge?
Absolutely not. This is a cultural thing. Look, there's a certain thing about going to war that, sir, you'd know about. There's a certain place in your head and your heart that you have to go to, and it's a very dark place. I mean, for me personally, it was stepping over the mangled body of a 9-year-old kid after a suicide bombing and going home and thinking nothing more about it. And look, in a sense, we've all participated in small war crimes. I know I've certainly seen my share of them. And according to the laws of war, and I have to tell you, this is a harsh reality, we of the West, we kill children. Right? If an 8-year-old is placing a roadside bomb, a sniper can legally shoot that child. When we finally tracked down the creator of the Islamic State in June 2006, he was sleeping in a house and we dropped 2 500-pound bombs on him. Now, in that house at the same time was the father who was hosting him, his wife, and 2 little kids, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. Now, someone had to make the decision to press that button and take that as an acceptable collateral risk. All that said, there is a line. There's a line you don't cross. You've got to have a moral compass. And it would appear to me, and the Australians are not alone in this, with the high frequency of the tours of duties and how much we lent upon our special forces. And you know, there is still a difference between the SAS in Perth and the commando units in Sydney. Different cultures, different vibes. It does appear to me that there was a culture that developed over a period of years within the regiment where this just became a part of the way they operated. And, sir, Ben Roberts-Smith is not alone. And none of this has been proven. So far, it's a civil trial.
It's a defamation case.
It's a civil trial.
There's no criminal charges.
It's on the balance of probabilities, or the Americans would call it the preponderance of evidence. And the Australians are not alone. The Brits are going through the exact same kind of inquiry right now. The Americans had kill squads, and they had to be dealt with.
Michael, you mentioned just there that you had also participated or turned a blind eye to war crimes. I just want you to elaborate on that, because it's a pretty grave comment.
It doesn't strike me as grave, but I guess it would.
Well, you've lived through it, but to those of us who haven't...
Because that's the thing. What's so striking about war is what you become accustomed to. Whether you're a civilian caught in the middle, whether you're an insurgent or on the other side, or whether you're one of us. You know, whether it's World War II, well, you can name any war you like. It's amazing what you become accustomed to and what becomes your dark every day. But as I said, there is a line. And I don't think we can talk conclusively until any of these have been through the criminal courts.
Yeah.
And that we are applying the test of beyond reasonable doubt.
There is a different test at the criminal level. I want to bring you in, Keith. You served in Afghanistan 3 times, including as a commander. You also worked as a barrister representing and defending 2 soldiers facing charges stemming from the Brereton inquiry. Now, I'm not going to ask you to compromise privilege, but obviously you've seen this firsthand. Talk to me about that line and defining that line, because yes, war is horrific, but clearly we do have international obligations in terms of the way we operate.
We do, and thank you for your question, Raymond. A lot of people say something similar to me, and they mean well when they say it, but it's not true. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. On Anzac Day and in Remembrance Day, we say, lest we forget. And for that to mean something, we must preference truth-telling over myth-making, because myth-making doesn't help anyone. I think when I think of all of the Australians who've served, and 3,000 served in special operations like I did, when you look at the Brereton report, you cannot ignore it. Yes, it's not at the criminal standard, and that defamation trial was not at the criminal standard, but you cannot ignore the findings of Justice Brereton and Justice Besenko. It matters. And so when I saw Nick McKenzie and Chris Masters at the steps of the court, I was struck by their eagerness to single out the SAS witnesses who gave evidence. That showed moral courage. I was struck by their keenness to show that there was a humanity to the people who lost their lives in Afghanistan, like Ali Jan. And in my second tour, I was a platoon commander, and we did a lot of our operations by day, which was a change from the first tour. And when you see people during the day, you see our common humanity. And so I don't think we can turn the other cheek to this. And we can revere our heroes, we can acknowledge that they're human, but we can hold ourselves to account, because we are a democracy and that's what we do. We can be proud of that, and we can say that that's something worth fighting for.
And if I can just say, the minute we start compromising our values, that's when the enemy starts winning.
I want to come in on that. I strongly agree with what Keith has said from the other side of politics. When governments make decisions to send our troops to war and into a theatre of risk and danger, we generally want to have 2 things on our side. One, a conviction that what we're doing is a just cause. And the second is that when we send our troops there, we will have moral authority. And we lose moral authority. We peel moral authority when we don't live up to the standards that we've signed up to internationally.
And Thenu, I know you're really, sorry, Sally, I know you're really activated on this issue of international responsibility.
Absolutely. Everything that the panel has said today on moral responsibility, that is what we need to think about as Australians right now. These people, these alleged victims, they're human beings. They have mothers, they have children, they have loved ones who are seeking answers right now. And the Brereton report revealed that Australian soldiers may have been the cause of their death, and they will be searching for these answers. So I think there's a really important discussion we need to have as a nation around compensation. This isn't just something, that will go away overnight, and these trials are still taking place, absolutely. But there has been really credible evidence given in this report that we need to do something about this, and we need to bring justice to these families.
If this discussion raises any issues for you or anyone you know, the numbers for Lifeline and Open Arms are there on your screen. We'll keep this conversation going with Anisha Gunawardana. Anisha?
There is a well-known maxim that justice delayed is justice denied. Given that Ben Roberts-Smith is Australia's most decorated war hero, does the panel believe that he should be stripped of his titles now in light of the judgment handed down by Justice Bazanko, or do you believe that in order to uphold the rule of law, such a decision should be made if there is a criminal finding?
Sally?
Probably the criminal finding. You know, not being a lawyer, but I think that sounds right. I think the other issue is that there's different types of strength. There's type of strength you need to be a soldier, and part of that is obviously a moral strength, and that's a particular thing we're asking of people, and holding that line is really important. And the other thing is the journalists. Like, if it weren't for those two journalists, this would have stayed in the dark and not come out publicly, and change probably wouldn't happen. And we should be celebrating that as well, because that is a sign of a healthy country where we're able to do this and then hopefully bring about change, whatever that change means.
Michael, where the titles have been a huge issue, of course. What do you make of it? Should he be stripped of them, or does there have to be a criminal procedure?
No, I agree that obviously a cloud hangs over Ben Roberts-Smith and the entire regiment, quite frankly. But no, we haven't had a determination by a jury of his peers. As we say, it was the evidence in a civil defamation trial is the balance of probabilities. It's not beyond reasonable doubt. So should we get to that moment, then yes, I think there would be a valid discussion about stripping him of that medal. But we have to get there first.
Right, so that is, do you see that as the benchmark?
Yeah, I absolutely think there needs to be a criminal trial. This is a different standard of proof that Ben Roberts-Smith will be held to.
And do you think the awards have to be linked to that?
I think that anyone that is convicted of a war crime does not have a basis to hold Australia's highest military honour. But aside from this, I think it's also really important to note that the only trial that has been set for these issues is the trial of the whistleblower. So what are we waiting for? These are urgent issues that people are waiting for answers for, and we really need to have a plan in place to answer these questions and bring justice to these families.
If I could talk of another award, which is the Leadership Awards that are being debated in the Senate and in the press, I think Defence has an obligation from the Brereton Report to address culture and leadership. And it doesn't have to be at the criminal standard. The whole Defence Force discipline system is not at the criminal standard. Those awards were given not at the criminal standard. And when you read the Brereton Report, clearly alcohol was a massive factor that contributed to behaviour. So when particular officers might have been given awards showing distinguished command and leadership, I think the Defence Force is entitled to say, well, maybe that wasn't distinguished command and leadership. And that doesn't have to wait for a criminal trial to occur, because it's not about...
So do you think that should happen straight away?
Well, I think there should be due process. So the administrative law standard should apply. People should be given procedural fairness and a right to reply.
But you do see that there's a sense of urgency around that for defence and leadership to send a message.
So the Brereton Report came out in November 2020. It's 2.5 years ago. We have Special Forces soldiers on 2 hours' notice to move right now. You know, those people are ready to go and put their lives on the line for all of us, and most of them never went to Afghanistan. So I think the sooner we deal with the leadership and cultural issues, the quicker the better.
Michael?
Because that's a very valid point, I would argue, is that right now the way we seem to be dealing with it here is that we're cauterising the wound at a certain lower ranked level. I think, you know, whether it's command tone or whether it's a lack of leadership or there just wasn't that moral imperative embedded from on high. That needs to be looked at just as much as what happened on those patrols. And we're not doing that.
The other element, of course, is the War Memorial and the way that Ben Roberts-Smith is commemorated at the War Memorial. There's been a big discussion around that. The War Memorial is looking at how to do that. What are your thoughts on whether it should be removed or altered?
It shouldn't be removed. It's a part of our history. But I think it should acknowledge, A, the Brereton Report and perhaps this defamation trial, perhaps.
Why do you say perhaps? Why isn't it a given?
Because Ben Roberts-Smith still has a right to appeal. And there's a question about whether there's a criminal charge or not. That's for the Office of Special Investigator. And one thing we've learned from the last few weeks is that politicians like me should stay out of criminal proceedings. It just doesn't do the system any good. He's entitled to the presumption of innocence and due process. But I think the Brereton report belongs in the War Memorial.
Okay. And this gets us to the topic of our online poll. We're asking you, should the Australian War Memorial remove its Ben Roberts-Smith display? You can cast your votes anonymously on the Q&A Facebook, Twitter and YouTube accounts, or the ABC News Instagram account, and we'll bring you the results later on in the program. Plenty to get to tonight. I'd like to bring in Ben Parker now from Brisbane. G'day, Ben. Hello.
Hi, Patricia. How are you?
I am excited to have you on the program. You're joining us via Skype. Just give us a sense of your situation.
Well, Patricia, I'm a flight attendant and I work at a large airline that sets up its own subsidiary labour hire companies in order to reduce wages and conditions of crew. And it's done that since 2007. So it leads to a bit of difference between our ranks, and it just doesn't come across as all that fair.
No. And you're actually, as a result, how are you going to fare as a result of the changes to the laws that Labor is proposing?
Well, I'd love to see what the laws actually look like in the first place, and that's kind of a little bit about my question this evening. So I'm hoping that, you know, for people who are employed at the subsidiary labour hire company like me, that our levels of wages rise, but also for my colleagues at the other end of the scale, the more experienced ones, that their pay doesn't drop.
Right, okay. Go ahead, ask your question.
All right, so as I said, I'm a flight attendant at the large airline, and we have these two different levels. In some marketing that the business lobbies groups have put together, they're claiming that by welcoming in the same job, same pay legislation, that hard work and recognition of experience won't be possible to reward with extra pay. So I just wanted to find out from the panel, what are some elements of same job, same pay that will protect that reward for people?
Sally McManus, I'll go to you first. Obviously, you're not the government, but you are the trade union movement that's been really calling for this. We don't have the detail of how it would work, but how would you like it to work?
Well, I don't know what company Ben works for, but Qantas has got 12 labour hire companies. Some of them they own themselves that have been set up or that they use, and people get paid differently for doing the same job. In fact, there's someone that I've met from a labour hire company who is a cabin manager and gets paid less than some of the people she supervises. So it's a really unjust system, and it's like that because effectively this company, as many have, are gaming the system. They're doing so to cut wages. Big mining companies are doing the same. What happens is consultants work out, here's a scheme you can do legally in order to pay people less, and this is what they've done. So what we want is for that to stop. It's not fair or right that those type of schemes should be allowed to be used to cut down wages. So the business lobby is running this really weird and wrong campaign saying that somehow it's going to force companies in Australia not to pay people more. Isn't that the most craziest thing that you could possibly even be saying that? What it will simply mean is that if you use labour hire, you can't pay them any less than what you pay them in the host company. So if you're a trainee, you get paid the trainee rates. If you've got 20 years experience, you get paid the 20 years experience rate. It's simply shutting down gaming. You know, they game that just like, you know, some companies game JobKeeper, and they do the same with tax. You've got to close those loopholes. Otherwise, it will spread across the economy. OK, Keith, your side of politics has been raising the sort of, you know, danger on this. Can you explain to me what you're concerned about?
Because the talking points for this sound fair and they sound reasonable, but the actual bill that's being put forward is not. It expands beyond just labour hire to services.
There is no bill.
There is no bill.
Well, the proposal, the policy proposal.
But that's the problem, isn't it? That at the moment it's a discussion paper, but we don't actually know the details.
Well, of course, the detail will come. But what we need in our economy more than ever is flexibility. And when you have a proposal to reduce flexibility, to centralise a wage system, that risks taking us back to the early 1980s. OK,
so let's go to Ben's question, though. Is it fair that these two classes of workers would be receiving such different wages for the same work?
Well, it depends upon the particular company.
Well, he gave us a scenario. Is that fair?
On the surface of it, it doesn't seem fair. Of course it doesn't. But again, the devil will be in the detail. And if this goes beyond just labour hire to services, then that will have a real impact upon our whole industrial relations system. And it will. And it will. And it will reduce flexibility. And when you reduce flexibility, you reduce productivity and you increase costs. And that is inflationary. And that is the number one risk that we have in our economy right now.
Sally, you don't seem convinced, but I'll bring you in, Stephen.
Yeah. I feel passionate about this. I spent about 10 years of my life dealing with circumstances just like Ben, where you'd negotiate an enterprise agreement with a workplace. There'd be 100 people in that workplace. Over the course of the next 3 years, that 100 people would shrink to 30, and there'd be 70 people there employed by a labour hire company on significantly less wages and conditions. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate design feature. We've had 20 years of flexibility. It's driven wages and conditions down. We do need flexibility, but we also need fairness and we need equity. And this is about ensuring that if somebody is doing exactly the same job in the same workplace and they've been doing it for years, same job, same pay should apply. It's not that hard.
OK, I'm going to go back to you, Keith. On that explanation, and you did say it didn't sound fair in Ben's scenario, does that mean that you do think there is an issue to sort out?
Well, potentially. But the issue that we have to look at, and it's about fairness, is about whether someone has the same experience or skill level. It's about rewarding effort and hard work.
We all agree with that. We all agree with that.
But there's a real risk in this policy proposal that it will put everyone at the same level and it won't reward that sort of effort.
How could it possibly stop an employer paying someone more if they want to pay them more? Can any government bring in such a law? Would anyone even propose it? I'd be opposing it. If they did that, I'd be opposing it. So that is ridiculous. I mean, it's the same beef and chicken that he's serving, and yet he gets paid differently.
I think, Sally, with due respect, anyone who's actually run a small business or a medium business...
very often anymore. I think it's a bit of an exaggeration, Sally McManus, but sure.
True, I take it back.
But just to finish off, like when you actually run a small business, and my parents have been involved running small businesses, that's not how the real world works.
It's got nothing to do with small businesses. It's got to do with big businesses.
It involves businesses, and if we do this, it reduces flexibility and it will be inflationary.
Yeah. Thenu, I want to bring you in because you're actually in a cohort of people, young people, if I can, make you a representative for your generation, who are really being disproportionately affected by these kinds of labour arrangements. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, we are. And it's not just young people, it's migrants, it's all types of vulnerable people in the society that are victim to exploitation as a result of these labour markets. And I think what this law has the potential to do is really remove these individuals from being treated like second-class citizens. Because that is how they are being treated right now. And elevating them to a standard rate of pay that is really just the basic level of pay that everyone else gets for the same outputs, I don't think at all will stop people with, more experience getting paid more. It just brings these people up to the same level that we hold to general society, which I think is
suppose a lot of the detail will be in the bill, and that's where some of this will be clarified, Stephen.
Consultation out at the moment. We're being criticised for not having the detail. We actually want to consult with businesses to ensure that examples such as those raised by Keith, unintended consequences are dealt with.
Because they can happen, can't they? Like he raises a decent issue in relation to.
But can we get some perspective on this? 2% of the workforce, overwhelmingly they are being paid. Overwhelmingly they're permanent employees, and overwhelmingly they're paid less than somebody working in direct employment doing exactly the same job. Yes, we want flexibility, but we also want fairness, and what's happening at the moment isn't fair.
Let me see what Ben thinks of all of the answers that have been provided. Ben, you've been sitting there listening very carefully. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I totally agree with what everyone has been saying on the panel this evening. I think that labour hire does have a really important role to play, particularly for my industry. We go through peaks and troughs, holiday seasons and things like that. And that's what I really think that labour hire would be perfect for. But, I've been in this role for over 10 years now, and I just want everyone to be paid the same. I just want it to be fair, so there's no differences between us.
All right, Ben, thank you for your question. Really appreciate your time tonight. Now let's hear from Aaron Robinson.
In the next week, the federal government will introduce legislation to ban Nazi symbols. But will this extend to underground music genres like nationalist socialist black metal? Many of these groups use blatant Nazi imagery in their merchandise and marketing, and when you call it out, everyone dismisses it as just being about the music. If the ban doesn't extend to blocking these groups' art and for their visas for them to tour here, isn't this just a cynical PR stunt or a pathetic virtue signal?
Aaron, I do like your midnight oil top there. I have noted that. Stephen, I want to start with you. Is it a pathetic virtue signal if it doesn't cover all of the other symbolism that's represented?
I never thought I'd sit in a parliament where this was a necessary thing to do. But after the last couple of months, clearly there has been a resurgence. And if you talk to our security agencies, they spend the majority of their time now dealing with right-wing extremism. No, it's not virtue signalism. It's sending a very powerful signal from the Parliament, from the federal government, that we do not celebrate this horrific piece of history and all the symbols that go with it. So yes, banning the flags and the symbols is an important part of that, but all of the other stuff that we're doing to combat right-wing extremism is also a part of the national government's effort.
Michael, what do you think of it, the actual banning this legislation?
Well, I've got a few questions about it, and I live in the United States, the land of the free. And look, this does touch upon free speech issues, right? Even in the United States, you can still be a member of the Nazi Party if you want to be. I don't understand why, but you can. So for me, there's a real tension between maintaining maximum virtue of free speech and yet acknowledging that these symbols have a deeper meaning and impact very differently upon different communities. You know, they hurt. What does escape me is that in terms of this legislation, they're talking about the use digitally and online and selling these symbols, yet if we're going to go down this road, you're still allowed to do the Nazi salute. So...
Well, their argument is that it's a state-based issue, right? That's the...
It's just simple a matter of our constitutional law.
Yeah.
We're doing what we have the constitutional capacity to do. And to your point about free speech, look, even in America, free speech isn't untrammelled, isn't without its limits. There are limits on free speech. And
yeah, you can't cry fire in a theatre.
Yeah, correct. And I think with free speech comes responsibility. And I wish we didn't have to legislate the responsibility not to wave Nazi flags, but apparently we do.
And in the United States, the security apparatus and Homeland Security identifies now domestic terrorism as the greatest threat to American society.
Yeah, let's not take the United States as a model, you know.
Yeah, no.
As you were saying before, there's a line, isn't there? And anything that goes to, supremacy of some humans over others and then to mass murder, we're way past that line.
And this has bipartisan support. In fact, it was Julian Leeser, then Shadow Attorney General, who put forward a private members bill. So we do support it, but the detail is important. The carve-outs are important. Art, documentaries, movies, Fawlty Towers, there's that.
I was going to bring that up myself.
Exactly.
We can't stop.
And you're happy with those carve-outs?
Well, I am, because you trust people. You trust people to recognise the intent of what it is that they're watching. And I think those carve-outs are important, and we'll wait to see the bill that's put forward.
But what's at the heart of it is this, that we are not going to celebrate a horrific piece of history. And we're not going to allow people to glorify and celebrate a murderous regime. We're just not going to do it. And I wish we didn't have to ban the symbols, because I'm not a big one on banning stuff, but it's necessary.
Sure.
In this instance. I could make a small point as well, I think it's crazy that we have to have this conversation in 2023. This is it's an ideology that has existed for over 100 years now, and we know for a fact that it has caused so much harm to many communities across the world. And I think seeing especially that salute and those symbols being used in modern day Australia is generally so frightening for a lot of communities of colour, for Jewish people. And I think that, to go back to your question, that there isn't really a place for the use of Nazi symbol, even when it comes to music, unless, you're doing it in a satirical way or something like that. Like, there absolutely isn't a place for that in our society. And I also think that it's really important that we understand that, yes, there is a right to free speech, but that right is always limited by the hurt that we can cause to others through these things.
And let's not forget that, this is happening globally too, you know.
Oh, and we're not operating in a vacuum, that's for sure.
And for example, anti-Semitism has been a seething broth in Europe particularly for centuries, and we're seeing it raise its ugly head there again too. So, yeah, we really do need to be alert to these issues. But again, there's that tension, I believe, with free speech. But no, by no means do I want to see people walking around in swastikas.
No, and we've seen it certainly on the streets of Melbourne. Yeah. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A live with Thenu, Herath, Keith Wolahan, Sally McManus, Michael Ware and Stephen Jones. On another topic now, here's Rob Duthie.
Hang on. In light of private US citizen Donald Trump having access to highly sensitive secret documents and being accused of serious breaches of security involving the Five Eyes group of nations, what steps will Australia take to ensure its own secrets are kept secure by all member countries, or would it be prudent to cut ties and getting better vision by becoming Four Eyes?
Michael. Four Eyes.
I thought you were going to go to Keith on that.
No, you're in the seat.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, sir, but under absolutely no circumstances should we sever our intelligence and security ties with our closest allies, America included. That Five Eyes grouping is vital to not just our security, but trying to maintain the international rules-based order that was established after World War II. You know, this is an issue about one former president and what he took upon himself to do and to take with him and to, as we now understand from the indictment, allegedly parade vital American secrets just to impress those around him. The worst part of all of this is, for me, is not necessarily the Five Eyes, because
there's some of the documents on the screen just then.
Yeah, you know, in terms of national security,
chandeliers and documents.
The wheels of geopolitical cohesion and our cooperation will continue despite Donald Trump. The most frightening part is that this has made him more popular. You know, the most recent poll shows that of likely Republican voters, since his two sets of indictments, one for allegedly fraudulent business practices over hush money to a former porn star, to now his allegedly inappropriate dealings with top secret documents, including invasion plans and American nuclear capabilities. He shot up in the polls. The most recent one has him with a lead at 61% of likely Republican voters against Ron DeSantis from Florida at 26%.
Sally,
that's what frightens me.
Sally, what do you... I mean, obviously, I know you're very focused on Australia, but when you see the emergence again of Donald Trump, and it's true, polling suggests that under more pressure, he rises. How do you view it?
I think it's happened because of the severe inequality in the US, and I think he is an out-of-control billionaire who's really, really dangerous, not just for that country, but for the rest of the world, and has been able to trade in lies. And I do worry if he gets re-elected. And also, I think it's a bit of what we were talking about before in terms of a rise of a politic that we all should be standing against.
Keith, you're a Conservative. How do you view this re-emergence of Donald Trump? Does it worry you?
I think the crossover of entertainment and politics is foreign to us here. We don't have that sort of celebrity politics here.
No.
I think we're better for it.
We're very bad at it, let's be honest.
I think Stephen and I would agree we're not celebrities, so we don't want to be.
Speak for yourself, Keith.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you've got the jacket.
You're a celebrity, mate.
Yeah, you've got the jacket. But I do remember, this is dangerous territory.
Malcolm lent it to me. Yeah.
It is. This is dangerous territory. I think it was on this show that Josh Frydenberg gave his honest view of then candidate Trump, and I think he regretted it later. He didn't get to go to the White House. So yeah, who hasn't left nuclear codes in their bathroom? So it happens to the best of us. But I think when it comes to your question, when it comes to security, in the Five Eyes relationship, that is key to our security, and it's no surprise that we are probably more of a recipient of intelligence than a donor. So I'd be very surprised if there was Australian secrets in those boxes behind the shower curtain.
Well, maybe. Stephen, how would Australia work with a potential Donald Trump, 2.0?
We don't interfere in their elections and their electoral processes. I do know that there are primaries going on at the moment for the Republican Party.
Would it be Australian on the alliance, though?
Look, we're not going to get drawn in to that specific question, but I do want to say this. In relation to the rule of law, there's a court process on place. We can't support the rule of law for people we like and not support it for people we don't like. So there's a rule of law process that will go into this. But I also say we've had quite a history in this country and elsewhere about controversies around access to security and national security information. And I think we should have a consistent approach in the way that we deal with that issue, whether it's somebody we like or somebody we don't like.
All right. The next question is a video from Simon Kidston.
In recent years, the Commonwealth Government has paid hundreds of millions of dollars to consultants for work previously performed by public servants. Following allegations of PwC allegedly disclosing confidential Treasury information to the multinational clients, my question to the panel is, will the government continue to outsource large amounts of work to firms such as PwC, which have displayed questionable ethics and a ticker-box culture for risk and conflict management?
Stephen Jones.
Simon, thanks for your question. What went on in PwC is a national disgrace with international consequences for that firm and others. And you're right to point to the excessive level of outsourcing of core Commonwealth and government work that has gone over the last decade.
But why haven't you banned all PwC work?
I'll come to that in a tick. So the first thing we are doing is ensuring that we are building up Commonwealth government and public sector capacity again, and we first instalment of that in the last budget. So we will be doing less outsourcing, is the short answer. Interestingly, with the PwC stuff, though, it didn't happen because we were outsourcing. It happened because we wanted to go and consult with some experts on developing policy. And frankly, if we can't consult in confidence with a group of experts on something, then government is poorer for it, and we get worse policy. So what Mr. Collins did in that affair is an absolute disgrace. There are ramifications immediate. Less outsourcing. Improving our procedures for outsourcing and government contracts now. There'll now be an ethics test. So if you're a business or individuals within your businesses that have behaved unethically, that will affect your capacity to win government contracts.
Anthony Wheely KC says it could, effectively this should be, or could be rather, referred to the federal ICAC. Should it be?
I think it'd be extraordinary if it wasn't, but I don't think it should be done at the behest of a politician. We set up an independent process. We established it, we've legislated it, and we were adamant. It's separate from politics, separate from government.
I understand that, but do you think this is worthy of consideration by a national integrity body?
These are the sorts of things that you would set up a national integrity body to look at.
So this to you meets the criteria of the sort of thing it should be looking at?
It's exactly the sort of thing that you would set up you would have a national integrity body to look at. But I think it's the integrity body itself that should act on this,
yeah, look,
not at the behest of government. And I'm not going to make a referral, and I'm not even going to be seen to be, pressuring a body to make a referral. But I think this one is something,
Keith?
When we had it in mind, it's exactly what you would want it to look at.
Should it be referred?
I just want to, say that Stephen's exactly right. We don't want to go forward with the knack with politicians going through the theatre of saying we're going to refer something to it. But I agree. What we saw at PwC was just appalling. And think about what happened. They were given confidential briefings on tax reform that stopped offshore tax minimisation. And they then sold that to clients for their own benefit and for those clients' benefit. That lost tax revenue has to be made up from somewhere, and it's a heavy income tax system that we have. And so think of all the things we didn't get to spend or save from that money, and that burden was put on other people.
Sally?
This is always going to be a risk. Like whenever you outsource to a company who's, of course, they're a company, they want to make money, they want more business, that is always going to be a tension. We've lost 16,000 public sector workers over the last 10 years. We should have people whose only loyalty and their only purpose in their job is to serve the Australian people and to give advice based on that only, and not also to have a pool of, oh, what about the next job? What about the next business? Yes, you can put, of course, things in place to make that less likely, but it was always going to be a risk.
Okay, so going forward, what do you think the government should be doing? Are they doing enough?
I think that they are also suffering what a lot of employers are because of the skills shortage at the moment. I think that it's a big job to rebuild the federal public sector workforce. I think that it needs to be done. We want our best and our brightest people working to serve us. We should have the experts internally, we should have the experts in our universities. We should be able to rely on ourselves and not be dependent on overseas big multinationals for this type of work.
Do you think just one question before I go. Do you think the ICAC, the NAC rather it's called, should be looking at this?
Yes.
Would you refer it?
I don't know. Does the ACTU Secretary get to refer things?
Yeah,
you can.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Well, you can't do the, I'm a politician, I'm at arm's length. You think it should be?
Yeah, I do think it's worthy of being investigated, absolutely.
Oh, and to be clear, I think it should be as well. I just think the theatre of us going through that process, of course it should be referred. I couldn't think of a better
you're
example.
aware of the optics of you looking like you're calling for it,
That's
but you're
right.
saying you think it should be.
Yeah.
Michael?
Well, I was just going to ask, but nonetheless, having come from a strong Labor background, union background myself, my family, there's still nonetheless a legitimate role for the private sector to be working with and within government. And I see that particularly in the defence industries.
Yep.
Like, if you look at the States, so many developments, technological developments and others, that have driven American national security capabilities have come from the private sector.
Sure, governments aren't going to be able to do everything and have all the skills and experience for everything, but we lost our core workforce. 16,000 people is a lot of people.
Next, we'll hear from Angelo von Moller.
We're all well aware of what the RBA can do to manage inflation, but what further levers can government pull to reduce the effects of inflation?
Sally?
Well,
you've been very critical of the RBA governor, so what do you think the federal government should be doing?
A report came out last week from the OECD, T.S. Coleman's OECD, which pointed to the fact that profits have driven inflation in Australia. Now, this is like a taboo subject that you're not meant to raise or to talk about, and everyone says, oh, no, that can't possibly be the case. Yet I think us as ordinary Australians know it's the case. Like, obviously, when the energy companies and the mining companies are doing so well, that flows through to prices. Obviously, we can see what's happening with airline prices, but also we see what's happening with the supermarkets as well, and they're all delivering big profits, all of them. And so, on one hand, we're all really hurting, and on the other hand, there's this protection of their profits, even if they're not increasing their margins, although we know the energy companies certainly are. And that we've got to start talking about this. We need more scrutiny on this issue because it's harder to hide when there's scrutiny put on this issue.
Do you think the federal government should be intervening on interest rates?
No.
Well, that's what the Greens are calling for, right? They're saying, sack the RBA governor, use your power to intervene. What do you think?
No, I think that the Reserve Bank being independent is important. I think that there's been a problem with the board. I think there has been groupthink happen there. I do think that they see things through a certain prism and are out of touch. I think they do not understand wages, and you don't have to listen to me, you just have to look at every single wage prediction they've made and it's been wrong. And the fact that they are now saying that, we put up interest rates, not because wages now are driving inflation, people are going backwards, like real wages are going dramatically backwards, that it might happen in the future. I think that if you make predictions based on something like that, which I think is wrong, It's a terrible situation we're now in, that they're making decisions to put up interest rates and crush ordinary people. So I do think there needs to be pretty drastic reform, but I still think they should be independent.
Keith, going to the question, which was what levers does the federal government have to pull? What do you think they should be doing? What would you do if you're in government?
Yeah, so fiscal policy matters as much as monetary policy, and right now there's a perception that the government is a bystander to inflation.
Wait. I want to pick you up on that.
Yeah.
Perception, or is it reality?
Well, I would say it's a reality, but it's also a perception because...
Well, perceptions don't really matter. Reality does.
Reality does matter.
Where's the evidence that it's just a bystander?
Well, the evidence is that we've seen interest rate rise after interest rate rise, and it's hitting people really hard. It's hitting younger people even harder. I was struck by the Commonwealth Bank's comparison of the first quarter of this year with the first quarter of last year, and those under 50 are getting hit particularly hard than those over 50.
There's no doubt about it. So what would you do if you're in power?
Well, there's some things that we need to look at, and Sally raised the corporate profits issue. There's some issues with that particular study, but we can't ignore it. It is an issue. I'm on the House Economics Committee, and we are looking into how we can improve competition policy. And there is some argument that the size of our economy, it's the 12th largest in the world, lends itself to oligopolies. And oligopolies tend to have oligopoly profits. And so I think there is a need for a review of competition policy in this country. There is a need to bring productivity back up again. And yes, we can have wage rises, but we need corresponding productivity increases as well. If we do that, then it won't be inflationary.
Just want to get some clarity on what you just said. You're saying that the point that Sally McManus made, quoting the OECD, you agree with and think has to be part of the discussion?
In part, we cannot ignore it, and we cannot ignore the issue of large corporate tax rates.
So you do think that profits are contributing to our inflation problem?
It can. There are flaws in that study, but I think it is an issue that we can look at.
Is that what's happening now?
It is. I'm not a trained economist. I studied economics, but I would never pretend to be a trained economist. But I think it is part of what's happening now, particularly when you look at our share market. Our top 50 companies haven't changed much over the last 50 years compared with the United States. Again, that is a sign of poorer competition compared to other countries. So I think we need to look at competition policy again. And again, to Labor's credit, on the Economics Committee, we are looking at that from a bipartisan perspective.
So it's not really a wages issue per se, if you look at that study. If profits are part of the story, why aren't we hearing about it? Well, we're hearing about it from you now, but we don't hear about it a lot from your side of politics.
Well, it's also, there's lots of things. There's about government spending. Government spending is inflationary, particularly off-budget spending.
Yeah, but I want to take you back to the profits, because it's the new thing here.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, look, and it's important. It is important. And when you look at the PwC issue, that last question, that was about reducing tax rates here, about shifting those offshore. So when you purchase something through Apple, you know that you purchase that here, but it gets sent off to the Virgin Islands or Singapore, and that's where the tax rates are deemed. So I think we can do better for Australians to ensure that we're not just shifting it all onto the Reserve Bank, and we're increasing competition and productivity. There's many different levers to pull, but at the moment it does feel like it's all been left to the Reserve Bank.
Thenu?
Look, I'm not a trained economist by any means, but I think there is a fundamental flaw in our financial system if, during tough times, the people who have the least are always asked to give the most. And what we're seeing here is that is exactly what's being asked of us. There's a question of intergenerational fairness here as well. Young people are being hit particularly hard, and we're constantly being asked to give up more and more. Young people are going, without more and more of their wages as they pay off an indexed HEX loan that is now 7% more than it was on before June 1st. We're paying more for rent, we're paying more for groceries, and some young people are also giving up really key essential things to meet these costs, things like medication, mental health support. And I don't think I have the solutions, and you are all much more trained to deliver these solutions than I am, but I think there is a genuine inequality here that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and obviously housing really has become a sort of lightning rod issue for your generation. What are the sorts of reforms that we need to be looking at to try and shift that intergenerational, some young people call it intergenerational theft, let's be honest.
Yeah, and so I think first of all, instead of calling it intergenerational theft, I think this is a problem for all of society.
Yes.
Like, young people aren't alone in this. These are your children and your grandchildren that are going to face increasing issues going into the future. And if we want to build an Australia that is prosperous, we need to address this issue. And so to your question about what can be done, when it comes to housing, we need to issue things like rent caps, especially when there are homeowners who have little to no mortgage and are passing on these interest rates. These interest rates, these home loans are increasing and therefore rent is increasing, locking young people out of the rental market. And I won't even get started on locking people out of the housing buyers market as well. So it's a really unequal system at the moment. And we know that there was a report that came out saying that Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, 25% of people who have bought houses have actually bought a house without mortgages. And so these interest rate hikes, they're not affecting these people. They're affecting young people and vulnerable populations the most.
Sally, I want to come back to you about a little bit of unity I saw between you and Keith Wolahan.
A little bit.
A little bit. Look at come on. Keith's really trying to play it down now. But I saw it. You saw it, didn't you, Michael? I didn't. Yeah, I saw it. I know my eyes aren't failing me on this. Profits, which you've been making the point about for some time. How to tackle them then? Are the remedies that Keith talked about the right ones?
I wouldn't want to verbal him. I think that I respect what you were saying. You were just saying I thought that this needs to be considered, needs to be seriously considered. There was a report that was put out. We need to consider it. And I think that that's a really good step forward. Like, we just can't be ignoring things like that, especially when there's evidence on the issue of intergenerational, injustice, let's call it that, because it certainly is. I just have to say I agree with you on rent. I think what's been happening is just completely unacceptable. Having some type of rent caps or controls in some way is, like, what is the solution? Like, we can't be in a situation where people can't even afford housing, and this seems to be where we've got, and like you said, no one can even think about buying anything. But if rents are going up so much and the people passing it on, don't need to do so, it's absolutely unfair. And, this is a state government mainly issue, but I think needs to be looked at.
Absolutely. And the one other thing I will add is that since Federation, we are predicted to be the generation, millennials and Gen Z, that will be for the first time worse off economically than our parents, which I think is a pretty stark thing to come to terms with. And this is not just a question for young people. Of course, we see it as totally unjust. We see it as theft sometimes, but this is a problem that needs to be addressed by all of society because it involves our future prosperity.
Next, we'll hear from Alexander Lau.
Hi everyone. To continue on, baby boomers as a cohort are some of the wealthiest people in the country. They've benefited from free tertiary education, decades of booming house prices and significant tax breaks for numerous types of investments, including property. Why are we looking to subsidise their retirements when most of them can afford to pay for their own?
Okay, great question, and just full declaration, I don't think we have any baby boomers on the panel.
No.
I think
some of my best friends are baby boomers.
I think Generation X and millennials are kind of overrepresented here. Okay, Stephen, beginning with you. I mean, sorry, mate.
Can I just say I hear this one a lot. Thanks for your question, Alex.
You hear it a lot because...
Yeah, you hear it a lot. And I just want to
it's the lived experience
jump
of
straight
most
into
young people, isn't it?
Yeah, I just want to jump straight into it, though. So... I don't think we're going to make progress if we pit one group of Australians against another group of Australians. I just want to say that. We've been through some pretty dark times over the recent periods where politics has been dominated by that, and we haven't been better for it as a country. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing, every generation has had some significant challenges. Yes, currently really difficult for young Australians to get into the housing market. Yes. Coming out of the university with a big HECS debt. But our generation isn't being conscripted to go to Vietnam, for example. Our generation is able to get a home loan if they're a woman and doesn't have to retire from the workforce as soon as they get married. So that's the baby boomer generation I'm talking about. They went through all of those. So look, every generation has faced its challenges. We don't progress by pitting one against the other. We progress by attempting to provide unifying solutions. Housing, we've got a big one. There aren't enough houses for the number of people that are looking for them. We've got to build more houses. We've got to ensure that we're providing education opportunities for people without crippling debt. So we've got some big challenges, but they're not going to be met, in my view, by pitting one group of Australians against another.
No, and of course it's not a homogenous group either. I mean, when you talk about baby boomers, you know, there's different people within that cohort.
Plenty of older women who are retiring with nothing for a lot of those reasons you've just said, are living in poverty.
Yeah. Thenu, you hear that? Let's not pit our generations. I mean, you said something similar actually, but there's red hot rage, really, isn't there, from a lot of young people that the system's cooked.
Absolutely, and I think there needs to be mutual understanding. Of course, solutions are only going to come about if we all work together on this, but I think older generations do really need to understand that things are so tough right now in ways that older generations have never experienced. You know, the older generations went to university for free. We have had to pay the largest amount of HECS debt, largest amount of loans that we have seen in Australian history, really. Similarly, you know, me and my friends can't even think of buying a house for another 10 years. That's not something that I think any other generation has faced before either. And yes, it's an intersectional issue and we need to be really cognizant about that. But I also think that we do need to come together and understand each other, and part of that is understanding the anger that is there as well.
This is coming out electorally now though too. So the renters are showing their power, and it's because the baby boomer generation used to be such a big cohort. It was like John Howard's, you know, cohort, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and millennials, I don't know about us Gen Xers, we've been skipped over, but the millennials are taking over in terms of the size, and that's playing out in some of the federal elections, a bit of what happened with the Teals and a bit what happened elsewhere. They're saying not acceptable, and for a long time politicians didn't want to touch the issue because they didn't want to upset that big generation, but that's becoming less and less so.
Quick question to you though, sorry, just on aged care, there is this idea, there's a lot of proposals and there's a task force that'll look at it, but one of them is a kind of levy that all workers would have to pay. Do you think that's fair, or should people who are older and are wealthy in terms of their property portfolios be means tested to pay for that sort of aged care support?
Yeah, again, you wouldn't want to see a situation where those at the moment who are in the workforce that are struggling so much and have to subsidise something, which was a question that actually they do have the means to pay for. So I think in the end it does come down to a fairness issue, and it doesn't sound fair to me.
And we can bring you the result of our online poll now, the one we mentioned before. We asked you, should the Australian War Memorial remove its Ben Roberts-Smith display? More than 12,500 of you responded. Here's how you voted. 56% of you say yes, 35% said no, and 9% said they were unsure. And to finish tonight's discussion, here's a question from Sharon O'Donnell.
To the panel. Cheques have decreased 90% due to the push to use electronic banking. The problem is now that financial providers have got everyone to move to electronic banking. They have put charges on that use. Why are there charges on the use of debit cards, which is the use of your own money in your own account, when financial institutions are making massive profits?
Very good question.
Yeah, Sally?
Very good question, very good question. Like, we see the profits of the banks at the moment too. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a very good question.
Guess what? We've got the Minister for Financial Services on the panel. Get that.
Who is the Minister for Financial Services, but definitely not an apologist for the banks.
So, what do you do
in
about
relation, like, there's no such thing as free money anywhere, so a charge will find its way somewhere in the system. So if it's not a direct thing that you see for operating a particular sort of account, it'll appear somewhere in the system. That's the first thing I want to say. On the issue of cheques, people just aren't using them very much anymore. And I think the Commonwealth Government is one of the biggest writer of cheques, and I think the majority of them go to doctors' practices or something like that. But anyway, we are a big writer of cheques. They're a big cost to the system. We want to phase them out. We want to ensure that everybody has access to banking services, and that is a challenge for us. People are doing banking in different ways. Most people, you know, who I think we were talking about the millennials, and they won't ever enter a bank. They'll do it all online, and it'll all be done very, very differently to the way that I did or my parents did banking.
Well, Thenu, I think you can reveal that you've, never?
Couldn't tell you how a cheque works, no.
Yeah.
Thenu has never
have you ever
seen...
been... When was the last time you went inside a bank?
Not sure, probably like 5 or 6 years ago when I first set it up.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Keith, I think you've signed a cheque.
I did. Well, the last cheque I did was my pre-selection cheque when I ran for the Liberal Party in Menzies. But I think to your point, the key issue there is competition policy. So we have 4 major banks, but I think there's a lot of competition coming in from other areas like Apple Pay and other digital currencies. I'd like to think that might drive those costs down and give people more choice, because when we have more choice, we reduce costs and it's better for everyone.
How about you, Michael?
Well...
Cheques everywhere?
Yeah, just throwing them around like confetti. Well, it's actually my wife who runs our family income and budget, and she doesn't own a chequebook.
Yeah.
I've come from America here to be part of the Sydney Film Festival for our film The Cape. I haven't been to an ATM. I haven't had to pull out Aussie dollars to do a single thing. And, for example, in Los Angeles, we have an incredibly heartbreaking problem with unhoused people. Yep. And, you know, outside the 7-Eleven, outside the Starbucks, there's always people who are desperate for just even shrapnel change. You just don't have it anymore. You know, even paper money is starting to disappear, let alone cheques.
It's for exactly that reason that we're reviewing the way the whole payment system works in Australia and why we're putting in place new regulation, to Keith's point, to ensure that we have greater competition. And you know what? The competition's going to come from different places than where it's come over the last 30 years. You'll have IT providers, mobile phone providers, Google, Apple, all the rest of it in there. We want to ensure there's a level playing field for between all of those providers, and hopefully that helps drive down the cost of actually providing the service in the first place.
Really excellent question, Sharon, thank you. And that's all we have time for tonight. Thanks to our panel, Thenu, Herath, Keith Wolahan, Sally McManus, Michael Ware and Stephen Jones. And thank you for sharing your stories and questions. Next week, we'll be with you live from Melbourne on the panel. Minister for the NDIS, Bill Shorten, National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie, comedian, singer and writer Reuben Kay, independent member for Kooyong Monique Ryan, and disability advocate Sam Connor. Head to our website to register to be in the audience. Good night.